Wings of Frost and Flame. Chapter 1. The Summons. The Sunfire Court shimmered like molten gold in the late afternoon, its crystalline spires catching light and throwing it back in warm, honeyed waves. Pyralis stood at the edge of the council terrace, his wings, translucent membranes shot through with veins of living flame, flickering with barely contained irritation. The marble beneath his bare feet was always warm here, heated by the perpetual summer that his people cultivated. But today, even that familiar comfort couldn't soothe his mood. "You cannot be serious," he said, his voice crackling like a campfire. High Counselor Solara regarded him with those ancient, knowing eyes that had witnessed 1,000 summers. Her own wings, massive and radiant as a sunset, remained perfectly still. "The Frost King's heir has agreed. Will the Crown Prince of Sunfire be less courageous?" Pyralis's copper skin seemed to glow brighter, heat rippling off him in visible waves. His hair, which shifted between shades of orange and red like living fire, sparked at the tips. "Courageous? You're asking me to spend 6 months living with him, Caelum of the Winter Waste, the Ice Prince who freezes everything he touches. Do you know what he said about our orchards last year? That they were an offense to the natural order and grotesquely abundant. And you called his glacier palace a frozen mausoleum where joy goes to die," Solara replied mildly, "which, I believe, was quoted in 3 separate treaties." Pyralis had the grace to look slightly abashed, though his wings continued their agitated flickering. The Sunfire Fae were creatures of passion and intensity, and he was no exception. Everything about him blazed, his temper, his loyalty, his magic. He lived in a world of warmth and growth, of citrus groves and spice markets, of music that lasted until dawn, and laughter that rang through the valleys. And now they wanted him to live with winter itself. "The old magic is failing," Solara continued, her voice gentler now. "The border between our realms grows unstable. Frost creeps into our lands, while your fire scorches his. If we do not learn to coexist, to truly understand one another, both our kingdoms will tear themselves apart at the seam." Pyralis closed his eyes. He'd seen it himself, the chaos zone where their realms met, where snow fell on desert flowers and made them shrivel, where his flames melted ancient ice formations that had stood for millennia. The balance was broken. 6 months, he finally said. 3 in his realm, 3 in mine. 3 in neutral ground, actually, Solara corrected. The Twilight Keep on the borderlands. It belongs to neither of you. You'll live there together, learn to combine your magics, find a way to stabilize the rift. Or die trying, I suppose, though I'd prefer you didn't. Your confidence is overwhelming. I have every confidence in you, Pyralis. It's your temper I worry about, and his frozen heart." She smiled then, a mysterious expression that made Pyralis deeply uncomfortable, though perhaps one will thaw the other. The Twilight Keep rose from the borderlands like a chess piece carved from stone and shadow. It was beautiful in its way, ancient and austere, built in a time before the realms had split into their extremes. Here the temperature hovered at something almost comfortable, neither freezing nor scorching. Gardens grew, but sparingly. Snow sometimes fell, but didn't always stay. Pyralis arrived in a chariot pulled by phoenix birds, their feathers leaving trails of sparks in the air. He touched down in the courtyard with a flourish, his wings spreading wide to catch the last rays of the setting sun. He wore only loose pants in crimson silk, leaving his chest bare, as was the custom of his people. Jeweled cuffs adorned his wrists and ankles, and a circlet of golden flame sat upon his brow. The cold hit him immediately. Not freezing, but cool enough to raise goosebumps along his arms. He suppressed a shiver and willed his internal heat higher. "Compensating already?" The voice came from the shadows of the keep's entrance, and then Caelum stepped into the dying light. Pyralis had seen him before, of course, at treaties and truces, at formal gatherings where they'd exchanged barbed pleasantries and frozen glares. But something about seeing him here, in this in-between place, made Pyralis actually look at him. Caelum was tall and lean, his body carved from paler lines than Pyralis's warm copper. Where Pyralis glowed, Caelum seemed to absorb light, his skin holding that peculiar luminescence of fresh snow under moonlight. His hair was white-silver, falling in a perfectly straight cascade to his shoulders, and his eyes were the pale blue of glacial ice. His wings, gods, his wings, were unlike any others Pyralis had seen. They appeared to be made of actual ice, crystalline and geometric, refracting light into cold rainbows. They should have been too heavy to fly with, but the frost fae defied that logic. He wore robes of winter white and steel blue, formal and covering every inch of skin except his hands and face. Even his feet were shod in soft boots. He looked, Pyralis thought meanly, like he was attending a funeral. "I don't compensate," Pyralis replied, letting heat ripple over his skin for emphasis. "I simply exist at the proper temperature for life. You're the one who looks half dead." "How original. Did you prepare that barb during your entire flight here?" Caelum's expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered in those ice-chip eyes. "I've been assigned the north wing. I assume you'll want the south, where you can slowly cook yourself into jerky." "Better than flash freezing into an emotionless statue. Oh, wait. We haven't even crossed the threshold, and you're already tedious." Caelum turned in a swirl of robes. "The household staff left provisions. Try not to burn the keep down before morning. I'd like to get at least one night of peace before 6 months of your presence." He disappeared into the shadows of the keep, and Pyralis was left in the courtyard, fists clenched and smoking slightly at his sides. This was going to be a very long 6 months.
Chapter 2. Combustion. The first week was a cold war in every sense of the term. Pyralis claimed the southern wing, which had large windows to catch the sun and a balcony overlooking the wild gardens. He kept his rooms warm, sometimes uncomfortably so, and wore as little as possible, partly from habit and partly because he knew it would bother Caelum's sense of propriety. Caelum took the northern wing, which featured stone walls thick enough to keep out heat and a view of the mountains where snow never melted. Pyralis only saw the inside once, when he'd accidentally incinerated a training dummy in the courtyard, and the smoke had triggered every alarm in the keep. Caelum's rooms were pristine to the point of sterility, everything in shades of white and blue and silver, as cold and perfect as a museum display. They took meals separately. When they had to work together on the magical exercises prescribed by their kingdoms, attempts to blend fire and ice magic to stabilize the border, the sessions ended in either frozen flames or melted ice sculptures, never anything useful. "You're trying to dominate the magic," Caelum said after the 5th failed attempt. They stood in the keep's practice chamber, a neutral space designed to contain magical accidents. Scorch marks and frost patterns warred across the walls, evidence of their failures. "You push with heat when you should be finding equilibrium. And you strangle everything with cold," Pyralis shot back. His wings were mantled in frustration, dropping embers onto the stone floor. "Fire needs oxygen, movement, life. Your ice just sits there and smothers everything." "Ice preserves, it protects, it endures." Caelum's voice remained level, but his wings had begun to glitter with sharp edges. "Fire consumes and destroys and leaves nothing but ash. Fire transforms. It clears the dead wood and makes way for new growth. Your precious ice just freezes everything in place, refusing to let anything change or evolve. At least ice doesn't burn everyone who gets too close." The words echoed in the sudden silence. Pyralis stared at Caelum, something hot and uncomfortable twisting in his chest that had nothing to do with his magic. What's that supposed to mean? Caelum's jaw tightened. For a moment, his perfect composure cracked, and Pyralis saw something raw underneath. But then the Ice Prince turned away. Nothing. This session is over. We're clearly incompatible. That's what I've been saying from the beginning, Pyralis muttered. But Caelum was already gone, leaving only a trail of frost in his wake. The breakthrough came, strangely, because of bread. Pyralis woke one morning to find the keep's kitchen cold and dark. The enchanted hearth that usually warmed the space had gone out completely, not unusual, as the keep's ancient magic sometimes failed. But that meant no hot food, and Pyralis was fairly certain he'd die if he had to eat another cold apple. He was debating whether to just set the whole kitchen on fire when Caelum appeared in the doorway. "The hearth is dead," Pyralis said by way of greeting. "I can see that." Caelum surveyed the dark fireplace with an unreadable expression. "Can you light it?" "Of course I can light it. I'm made of fire." "Then why haven't you?" "Because it's not meant for regular fire. It's a magic hearth. If I just blast it with flame, I could destabilize the whole network of warming spells throughout the keep, and then we'd both be miserable." He expected Caelum to leave. The Ice Prince had made his disdain for Pyralis' reckless approach to magic abundantly clear. But instead, Caelum moved closer, studying the dead hearth with interest. "Show me where you would apply the flame," he said. Pyralis blinked. "What?" "Show me. I have an idea." Suspicious but curious, Pyralis knelt by the hearth and placed his hand near the central stone. "Here, this is the heart of the enchantment. If I could light it gently enough, the spell would catch and spread. But you can't control your flame precisely enough." "I can control it fine, without overwhelming it," Caelum amended. He knelt beside Pyralis, close enough for the fire fae to feel the chill radiating from him. It should have been unpleasant, but somehow, in the cold kitchen, it was almost refreshing. "What if I created a shell around your flame, ice to contain and direct it, to keep it from spreading too far too fast?" Pyralis turned to him, genuinely surprised. "That could work. But you'd have to adjust the ice constantly as the flame grows. If it's too thick, you'll suffocate the fire. Too thin, and it'll shatter." "I'm aware of the challenge." Caelum's lips quirked in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "I didn't know fire fae could be suffocated. I thought you just burned hotter when opposed." "We burn brighter," Pyralis corrected. "Not necessarily hotter. There's a difference." "Enlighten me." Pyralis found himself explaining, his hands gesturing as he spoke, leaving trails of sparks. "Heat is just energy, temperature, but brightness is about intensity of presence, about being impossible to ignore. You can have a low, hot coal that barely glows, or a bright flame that dances and demands attention but doesn't burn as deep." Caelum was watching him with an expression Pyralis couldn't quite read. "And you're which one?" "Depends on the day," Pyralis said with a grin. Then, before he could overthink it, "Ready to try this?" They positioned themselves on either side of the hearth. Pyralis summoned a small flame to his palm, keeping it controlled and concentrated. Caelum extended his hand, and ice began to form, not a solid block, but a delicate crystalline cage that surrounded the flame without touching it. "Closer," Pyralis murmured. "I need to reach the stone." Caelum moved his ice cage forward, and Pyralis moved his flame with it. They were both holding their breath now, focused entirely on the magic. The flame flickered within its ice prison, casting blue-white refractions across Caelum's face. Pyralis found himself distracted by how the cold light played across the other fae's features, highlighting the sharp cut of his cheekbones, the unexpected softness of his mouth. "Focus," Caelum said quietly. "Right." Pyralis guided the contained flame to the heartstone. The moment it made contact, he poured more energy into it, feeding the flame. Caelum's ice adjusted instantly, creating channels that directed the heat into the enchantment's pathways while preventing it from exploding outward. The heartstone began to glow, then the ones around it. Within seconds, the entire hearth burst into warm, steady flame. They did it! Pyralis looked at Caelum and found the Ice Prince staring back at him with an expression of wonder that transformed his usually cold features into something almost warm. "We did it!"
Caelum said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We did," Pyralis agreed. His heart was racing, but not from the magic. For a long moment, they knelt there by the rekindled hearth, their hands still extended towards each other, frost and flame dancing in the space between them. Then Caelum seemed to remember himself. He pulled back, and the ice shattered into glittering dust. "I'll return in an hour for breakfast. That should give you time to prepare something that won't poison us both. My cooking isn't that bad." But Caelum was already retreating toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to Pyralis. It was well done, the spell. Then he was gone, leaving Pyralis alone with the warm hearth and a strange fluttering feeling in his chest that felt dangerously like hope.
Chapter 3. Thawing. After the hearth incident, things began to shift. They still argued. That seemed to be their natural state. But now their evening training sessions sometimes ended in success rather than destruction. Pyralis learned to read the minute shifts in Caelum's ice formations, understanding when to press forward with heat and when to pull back. Caelum learned the rhythms of Pyralis' fire, how to create structures that worked with the flames rather than against them. Small successes built on each other. They managed to create a rose bush that bloomed with flowers rimmed in frost but warmed from within, surviving in temperatures that should have killed it. They learned to walk the border between their realms without causing magical havoc, their combined presence somehow soothing the unstable energies. With the magical progress came a tentative truce in other areas. They began taking meals together, partly for efficiency and partly because Pyralis wouldn't admit it out loud. The keep felt too empty when they stayed separate. Their conversations evolved from pure antagonism to something more complex. Debates about philosophy and magic, arguments about literature. Caelum favored ancient epics while Pyralis loved bawdy contemporary poetry. Even laughter when Pyralis told stories about his theatrical younger sister or Caelum shared dry observations about court politics. Pyralis learned that Caelum wasn't actually emotionless despite his frozen exterior. He was just careful, guarded. Where Pyralis expressed every feeling immediately and intensely, Caelum kept his emotions locked behind walls of propriety and control. "Why?" Pyralis asked one evening. They were in the library, neutral territory, with Pyralis sprawled across a couch by the fire, while Caelum sat in a straight-back chair, perfect posture as always. "Why do you lock everything away like that?" Caelum looked up from his book. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You feel things. I've seen it. When we got that spell right with the hearth, you were excited. When I told that story about the ambassador who slipped on ice at the winter summit, you laughed, but then you just shut it away, freeze it over." "Not everyone needs to burn as brightly as you do," Caelum said, his tone defensive. "I'm not saying you should be like me. I'm asking why you won't be like you." Caelum was quiet for a long moment. The firelight played across his pale features, warming them almost imperceptibly. "When I was young, I had a friend, a frost fae boy from a lower house. We were inseparable. We laughed together, trained together. I thought," he paused, "I thought he cared for me, for myself, not for my title." Pyralis sat up, giving Caelum his full attention. "One day I overheard him talking to his family. He said that I was useful to know, that my affection was convenient, that I was too cold to notice he was using me." Caelum's voice remained level, but his wings had begun to glitter with sharp ice crystals. "So I decided he was right. If I was too cold to notice, I should be. Cold doesn't hurt. Cold doesn't feel. Cold endures." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," Pyralis said quietly. "I don't need your pity," Caelum said starkly. "It's not pity." Pyralis stood and moved closer, drawn by something he didn't fully understand. "It's just sad that one idiot made you think you had to freeze yourself forever.
"You're not too cold, Caelum. You're just afraid of melting." Caelum finally met his eyes, and Pyralis saw a vast loneliness there, an isolation as deep and cold as winter itself. "And you're afraid of burning out," Caelum said. The words hit Pyralis like a physical blow because they were true. He burned bright and fast, threw himself into everything with intensity because some part of him was always terrified that if he stopped, if he cooled even a little, he'd discover there was nothing substantial beneath the flames, just smoke and ash. "Maybe we're both afraid," Pyralis said. "Maybe we are." They stood there in the library, fire and ice, close enough that the air between them shimmered with competing temperatures. Pyralis could feel the chill radiating from Caelum's skin, could see the frost forming on the windows, and yet for the first time since arriving at the keep, he didn't feel the urge to burn hotter to compensate. Caelum reached out slowly, giving Pyralis plenty of time to pull away. His pale fingers brushed against Pyralis's arm, and the fire fae gasped at the sensation. Cold, yes, but not painful. Refreshing, like a cool stream on a summer day. Where Caelum touched, the fire fae's constant heat eased into something more comfortable, more balanced. "You're not burning me," Caelum said with wonder. "You're not freezing me," Pyralis replied. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Caelum withdrew his hand and stepped back, and Pyralis felt the loss of that touch like a physical ache. "It's late," Caelum said. "We should rest. We have border work in the morning." "Right, yes, rest." Pyralis couldn't seem to make his feet move towards the door. Caelum lingered too, looking like he wanted to say something, but in the end he just nodded formally and swept out of the library, leaving Pyralis alone with the crackling fire and the echo of cold fingers against his skin. That night, Pyralis lay in his warm bed in the southern wing and couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about ice-blue eyes and the way Caelum's lips had almost curved into a smile, kept thinking about loneliness and fear and the strange, impossible comfort of cold against his skin. In the northern wing, Caelum lay in his cold bed and traced the place on his palm where he had touched Pyralis, where the warmth had sunk in and, for a moment, made him feel less alone than he had in years. Neither of them understood yet what was happening between them, but the ice was beginning to crack, and the fire was learning to bank itself into something warm rather than consuming. And in the borderlands between their kingdoms, the unstable magic began, very slowly, to settle.
Chapter 4. Collision. The problem started, as many problems do, with good intentions and terrible timing. They were 3 months into their stay at the Twilight Keep, and the progress had been remarkable. The border between the Sunfire and Frost realms had stabilized significantly. Plants grew in the once chaotic zone, adapted to both heat and cold. The dangerous magical surges had decreased by nearly 70%. More importantly, though neither would say so out loud, they'd become something almost like friends. Almost. Because friendship didn't explain why Pyralis found himself constantly aware of where Caelum was in any room. Didn't explain why he'd started wearing slightly more clothing, not less, when around the Ice Prince. Because seeing Caelum's eyes track across his bare chest made him feel heated in a way that had nothing to do with his magic. Didn't explain the dreams he'd been having, where frost and flame intertwined in ways that were decidedly non-magical. And friendship certainly didn't explain what happened on the evening of the spring equinox. The keep celebrated the occasion with a small gathering, just the two of them and a handful of neutral realm fae who maintained the property. Someone had brought spiced wine from the Sunfire lands and ice wine from the Frost Kingdom. Someone else had suggested dancing. Pyralis had drunk more than he should have, not enough to be drunk, but enough to be warm and loose and reckless. He danced with several of the neutral fae, all whirling movement and laughter. Across the room, Caelum had remained seated, sipping his ice wine, watching with those crystalline eyes. "You should dance," Pyralis said, dropping into the chair beside him. He was breathless and glowing, his skin sheened with heat. "I don't dance," Caelum replied. "Everyone dances." "I don't." "Because you can't or because you won't?" Caelum's jaw tightened. "Because I have no desire to make a spectacle of myself." "Dancing isn't a spectacle, it's just living, moving, feeling the music." Pyralis leaned closer, emboldened by wine and proximity. "When was the last time you did something just because it felt good?" "I'm not like you, Pyralis. I don't chase every sensation that crosses my path." "Maybe you should." The air between them crackled, literally, with small sparks of competing magic. They'd gotten close like this before, but always in the context of spell work. This was different. This was personal. "You think you know me," Caelum said quietly. "You think because I've told you a few stories, shown you a few cracks in the ice, that you understand what I am, but you don't." "Then show me." "Why? So you can burn through my defenses the way you burn through everything else? So you can consume whatever you find there and move on to the next interesting thing?" The words were sharp as icicles, and they struck deep. Pyralis pulled back as if he'd been slapped. "Is that really what you think of me?" Caelum's expression shifted, regret maybe, or pain, but before he could respond, one of the neutral fae called out, asking for help with something in the kitchen. Caelum seized the excuse and fled, leaving Pyralis alone with the music and the wine and a hollow ache in his chest. Pyralis avoided him after that. It was childish, he knew, but he couldn't seem to help it. He took his meals early or late, spent his days in the southern gardens, cut their training sessions short with excuses about fatigue or prior commitments. If Caelum noticed, and of course he didn't comment, just grew more remote, his expression more frozen. The border magic, sensing their discord, began to destabilize again. Small surges at first, then larger ones. The council sent concerned messages. Their handlers threatened to separate them, to declare the experiment a failure. Pyralis told himself he didn't care, that he'd been right from the beginning. He and Caelum were incompatible, fire and ice. They'd always been doomed. But late at night, alone in his too-warm room, he remembered the feeling of Caelum's cold fingers against his skin, the way the Ice Prince's face had transformed when he smiled. The countless small moments over 3 months when they'd worked together in perfect synchronization, their magic flowing together as naturally as breathing. He'd been falling for Caelum, probably since that first morning in the kitchen with the hearth, maybe even before, maybe from the very first time he'd seen those ice-blue eyes flash with hidden fire and realized there was a passionate soul buried beneath all that frost. And he'd ruined it by pushing too hard, burning too bright, demanding more than Caelum was ready to give. The realization came on a cold, clear night 2 weeks after their fight. Pyralis stood on his balcony, watching the stars wheel overhead, and felt something inside him crack open. Not his fire, that burned as hot as ever. Something deeper, something that felt dangerously like his heart. He needed to apologize, needed to make this right, even if Caelum never felt the same way, even if they could only ever be reluctant allies, because the alternative, existing in this frozen war, this bitter silence, was worse than any rejection. Decision made, Pyralis wrapped a cloak around him and headed for the northern wing. He found Caelum in the training chamber. Caelum stood in the center of the room, surrounded by elaborate frost formations. He was creating and destroying them in rapid succession, each structure more beautiful and more violent than the last. Sharp ice spears, delicate snowflakes the size of shields, geometric patterns that hurt to look at. "Caelum," Pyralis said from the doorway. The ice constructions shattered. Caelum spun with his wings flaring with sharp edges. "What do you want?" "To apologize." That seemed to catch him off guard. The aggression in his posture eased slightly. For what? For pushing, for acting like you owed me something, your feelings, your secrets, your anything. You were right, I do burn through things. I get intense and overwhelming, and I don't always think about how that affects other people. Pyralis leaned into the room, his hands raised in supplication. But I need you to know that you're not just another interesting thing to me. He trailed off, unsure how to continue. How do you tell someone who'd built walls of ice around their heart that you wanted to warm them, that you'd somehow fallen in love with their frost and their sharp edges and the glimpses of passion they tried so hard to hide? And what if I don't want careful? Pyralis's heart stuttered. What? You think you're the only one who's been affected by these months together? You think I haven't noticed that I'm warmer when you're around, that I smile more, that I've started to remember what it feels like to want something other than solitude and safety? Caelum! I've spent years building walls, Pyralis, years convincing myself that being cold was the same as being strong, that if I never let anyone close, I could never be hurt again. And then you arrived, all fire and passion and insufferable confidence, and you started melting those walls without even trying. Another step. They were close now, close enough that the air between them turned to mist where hot and cold collided. It terrified me, Caelum continued. You terrify me, because if I let myself thaw, if I let myself feel everything I've been freezing away for so long, I don't know what will be left. I don't know who I am without the ice.
You're Caelum, Pyralis said simply. Brilliant and sharp and absolutely infuriating. You're the person who thinks 3 moves ahead in every conversation, who remembers everyone's names and stories even when you pretend not to care, who works himself to exhaustion trying to protect a kingdom that demands perfection and gives nothing back. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention. You're the person I've somehow fallen in love with, ice and all. His palm cupped Caelum's cheek, warm against cold, fire against frost. For a heartbeat, Caelum's eyes went wide with shock. Then, with a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, he leaned into the touch. I don't know how to do this, Caelum whispered. Neither do I, Pyralis admitted. I've never loved someone who wasn't fire, never thought I could. Love? Caelum's voice cracked on the word. Love, Pyralis confirmed, if you'll have me. If you're willing to risk thawing for someone who might burn too bright sometimes, but who swears he'll try to learn how to just warm you instead. Caelum's hand came up to cover Pyralis's where it rested against his face. His fingers were ice cold, but his expression was the warmest thing Pyralis had ever seen. I'm willing to risk it, if you're willing to risk loving someone who might freeze you out when things get difficult, who forgets that not everyone can read his silences, who has no idea how to be vulnerable without feeling like he's shattering. I'm willing, Pyralis said, then with a grin that was pure flame. Besides, I'm pretty sure we've established that we're balanced. I can't freeze you, and you can't burn me. We're perfectly calibrated to drive each other insane without causing permanent damage. How romantic, Caelum said dryly, but he was smiling, really smiling, with warmth in his eyes and color in his pale cheeks. Can I kiss you? Pyralis asked. I've been wanting to for weeks, and I need to know if it will be as earth-shattering as I've imagined, or if I've built it up too much in my head, and I'll be disappointed. You're aware that you're doing the fire thing again, the burning too bright thing? I'm aware, but I'm asking anyway. Caelum's smile turned soft, and he leaned forward to close the distance between them. Yes, you can kiss me, and for the record, I've been wanting this too. Their lips met, and it was everything. Fire and ice colliding in a way that should have destroyed them both, but instead created something new.
Pyralis tasted winter on Caelum's lips, crisp and clean and bright. Caelum felt warmth unfurl inside him like spring after endless winter. Their wings flared and tangled, flame and frost dancing together, and around them the air itself seemed to shimmer with magic. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the Twilight Keep was transformed. Ice formations glowed with inner fire. Frost flowers bloomed with warmth at their hearts. Their magic had woven together into something neither could have created alone. "Well," Pyralis said, his voice rough, "that was definitely earth-shattering, possibly kingdom-shattering. Did we just cause another border incident?" Caelum laughed, actually laughed, bright and unrestrained. "Probably. We should check if we've accidentally merged our kingdoms or something equally dramatic." "In a minute." Pyralis pulled him close again. "I want to kiss you some more first, for scientific purposes, to make sure we can control the magical side effects." "That's a terrible excuse. And yet you're not arguing." "No," Caelum said, his ice-blue eyes warm as summer sky. "I'm not." They kissed again, and around them the Twilight Keep glowed with balanced magic, warmth and cold, passion and restraint, fire and ice finally finding their equilibrium. Chapter 5. Frost and Flame United. The morning after their first kiss, Pyralis woke to find frost patterns on his windows. This shouldn't have been possible. His rooms in the southern wing were kept perpetually warm, heated by his own magic and the sun-catching architecture. Ice didn't form here. Ice couldn't form here. Unless someone had been standing by his window for quite some time, cold magic radiating outward in waves of emotion. Pyralis smiled and pressed his hand to the glass. The ice melted under his palm, revealing the courtyard below, where Caelum stood, perfectly still, staring up at his window. Even from this distance, Pyralis could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his wings. The Ice Prince was panicking. Pyralis threw on a loose shirt, a concession to the morning chill, and hurried downstairs. He found Caelum in the same spot, now staring determinedly at the ground. "Good morning," Pyralis said softly. Caelum's head snapped up. "I didn't mean to freeze your windows. I was just thinking, and my magic sometimes responds to my emotional state when I'm not paying attention. And I know you hate the cold in your spaces, so I'll go—" "Caelum," Pyralis caught his hand. "I don't hate it when it's from you." The Ice Prince blinked, his rapid-fire words cutting off abruptly. "You don't?" "No, it was actually kind of romantic, like you left me a message written in frost." Pyralis tugged him closer. "Though I am curious what you were thinking about so intensely that you accidentally iced over my entire window." Color rose in Caelum's pale cheeks, actual color, pink and warm. "I was thinking about last night, about whether I dreamed it, about whether you'd wake up and regret it." "Why would I regret it?" "Because I'm not—" Caelum gestured at himself, frustrated. "I'm not easy, Pyralis. I'm cold and distant, and I don't know how to be the kind of partner someone like you deserves, someone warm and open and—" Pyralis kissed him, cutting off the spiral of self-doubt. When he pulled back, Caelum looked dazed. "You're exactly the partner I want," Pyralis said firmly, "cold and distant and sharp-edged and brilliant. I don't want you to be something you're not. I just want you to let me in, to trust that I can handle the frost." "I'm trying," Caelum said quietly. "I've spent so long keeping everyone at a distance. It's strange to want someone close. We'll figure it out together, both of us, learning as we go. Besides, we have another 3 months here, plenty of time to practice being together before we have to face our kingdoms." A shadow crossed Caelum's face. "About that. You're worried about what they'll say? Aren't you?
The Sunfire Crown Prince and the Frost King's heir? Fire and ice. Our people have been enemies for centuries. They sent us here to stabilize the border, not to—" he trailed off. "Fall in love?" Pyralis supplied. "Maybe that's exactly what was needed. Maybe the border was unstable because our kingdoms have been at odds for so long, and now we're proof that fire and ice can coexist, can thrive together." "Or they'll see us as traitors to our respected elements." Caelum's ice-blue eyes were troubled. "Your people might think I've corrupted you with cold. Mine might think you've weakened me with warmth." It was a valid concern. Pyralis had been trying not to think about it, but Caelum, ever practical, ever planning ahead, would naturally worry about the political implications. "Then we'll deal with it when the time comes, together. For now, can we just enjoy this? Enjoy us?" Caelum studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Together. Yes, I can do that." They stood in the courtyard as the sun rose higher, warming the stones and melting the frost. Pyralis kept his hand in Caelum's, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they faced everything else. Fire and ice, balanced and strong. The next weeks passed in a blur of magic and discovery. Their spell work improved exponentially now that they weren't fighting their attraction to each other. They created wonders in the practice chamber, roses that bloomed with petals of flame and leaves of frost, sculptures that shifted between ice and fire without destroying either element, weather patterns that brought both snow and sunshine simultaneously. But more than the magic, they were learning each other. Pyralis discovered that Caelum loved music but was too self-conscious to dance. So Pyralis taught him in the privacy of the keep's ballroom late at night when no one could see. Caelum was stiff at first, counting steps and overthinking every movement, but gradually he relaxed into it. By the end of their third lesson, he was smiling, letting Pyralis spin him across the floor, his ice crystal wings catching the candlelight. "See?" Pyralis said, breathless and happy. "You're a natural." "I'm adequate at best," Caelum replied, but he was still smiling. "You're beautiful," Pyralis corrected, and watched with satisfaction as frost spread across the windows, Caelum's magic responding to the compliment as he tried to maintain his composure. Caelum discovered that despite his bold exterior, Pyralis had deep insecurities about his worth beyond his magic. The Fire Fae talked constantly, filled silences with words and laughter, but it was because silence made him confront uncomfortable thoughts. Thoughts about whether he was anything more than a pretty flame, whether his people valued him or just his power. So Caelum made a point of telling him, casually, in passing moments, "Your observation on the border magic was insightful. I appreciate how you always remember to ask the staff about their families. You made me laugh today. That's rare. Thank you." Small affirmations, but Pyralis glowed after each one, literally, his skin brightening with pleasure. They established routines. Morning training in the practice chamber, afternoon spent on border patrol, monitoring the stabilizing magic, evenings in the library or the gardens, talking until the stars came out, and nights were for them alone. They took things slowly by Pyralis' standards. Caelum needed time to feel comfortable with physical affection, with vulnerability, but each small step forward felt like a victory. The first time Caelum initiated a kiss, the first time he let Pyralis see his chambers again, invited him into that private, perfectly ordered space. The first time he fell asleep with his head on Pyralis' shoulder, trusting enough to lower his defenses completely. Pyralis hoarded these moments like treasures, each one proof that Caelum was tawning, opening up, learning to trust. And Caelum found himself transformed. The ice that had encased his heart for so long was melting, revealing feelings he'd forgotten he could have: joy, desire, hope, even the fear
the fear that this was too good to last, that something would rip Pyralis away. But even the fear felt alive in a way his frozen existence hadn't. They were happy. For the first time in longer than either could remember, they were genuinely, completely happy.
Chapter 6. Embers of the Past. The message arrived on a morning thick with summer heat. Pyralis was in the southern gardens, trying to create a spell that would keep the delicate frost flowers Caelum loved alive in warmer temperatures. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice the phoenix bird messenger until it landed on his shoulder in a burst of sparks. The letter was sealed with the sigil of the Sunfire Court, his mother's personal seal. Pyralis' stomach clenched. His mother, Queen Solaria, rarely sent personal messages. When she did, it was never good news. He opened the letter, and his hands began to shake before he'd finished the first paragraph. Pyralis, word has reached us of your relationship with the Frost Prince. While we are pleased that the border magic has stabilized, we are deeply concerned about the nature of your attachment to him. The Sunfire Court has standards, traditions, expectations for its crown prince. Your duty is to your people, to the warmth and light we represent. A union with the Frost Kingdom's heir, no matter how politically expedient it might seem, goes against everything we stand for. We expect you to conclude your mission at the Twilight Keep and return home immediately, alone. Your dalliance with winter ends now. Do not disappoint us in this, my son. You are fire. He is ice. Some elements are not meant to mix. Queen Solaria. Pyralis read the letter 3 times, each time hoping the words would change. They didn't. His mother knew. Somehow she knew about him and Caelum, and she was ordering him to end it. The paper in his hands began to smolder, curling at the edges as his magic responded to his rage and hurt. He forced himself to take a breath, to bank the flames before he incinerated the entire garden. Pyralis? He turned to find Caelum approaching, concern evident in his expression. The Ice Prince could always read him, could see through his masks to the turmoil beneath. "What's wrong?" Caelum asked, stopping a few feet away. "Your magic is sparking. I could feel the heat surge from inside the keep." For a moment, Pyralis considered lying, considered hiding the letter and pretending everything was fine. But they'd promised to be honest with each other, to trust each other with the difficult truths. So he held out the scorched letter. "My mother knows about us. She's ordering me to come home, to end things between us." Caelum took the letter with steady hands, his face carefully blank as he read. That blankness, that return to the frozen mask, scared Pyralis more than tears would have. When Caelum finished the letter, he carefully folded it and handed it back. "I see." "That's it? You see?" "What would you like me to say?" Caelum's voice was level, emotionless. "We knew this was a possibility, that our kingdoms might not accept us. Your mother is simply being realistic about the political impossibility of—" "Don't do that," Pyralis interrupted, heat rising in his voice. "Don't freeze me out. Don't retreat behind your walls just because things got difficult." "I'm not retreating. I'm being practical. Your mother is right. You're the crown prince. You have duties, responsibilities. You can't throw all of that away for—" He gestured vaguely between them. "For what? For us? For love?" Pyralis stepped closer, his wings flaring with agitation. "That's exactly what I'm willing to do. I don't care what my mother says. I don't care about tradition or expectations. I care about you. And I care about you too much to let you destroy your future for me." Caelum's composure was cracking, ice crystallizing on his skin.
You love your kingdom, Pyralis. You love your people. Do you really think you'd be happy if you defied your mother, if you caused a rift with the Sunfire Court? Eventually, you'd resent me for it, resent us. That's not true, is it? Think about what you'd be giving up. Your crown, your position, your family's approval. And for what? For a few months of happiness with someone who's wrong for you in every possible way? Caelum's voice was brittle, like ice about to shatter. Your mother is right. Some elements aren't meant to mix. Stop using her words. Those aren't your words. Maybe they should be. Maybe I've been selfish, letting this continue when I knew it couldn't last, when I knew that eventually reality would intrude, and you'd have to choose between your duty and this. Pyralis felt something hot and painful lodge in his throat. You're breaking up with me. You're actually breaking up with me because my mother sent a letter. I'm setting you free, Caelum corrected, his ice-blue eyes swimming with carefully contained emotion. I'm letting you go before this gets any more complicated, before we're in any deeper. I'm already in deep. I love you. I've told you that. Do you think that just goes away because my mother disapproves? Love isn't always enough. Caelum took a step back, putting distance between them. You said yourself that we deal with our kingdom's reactions when the time came. Well, the time has come, and the answer is clear. Your mother won't accept us. My father won't either once he learns. We can't build a life on opposition and defiance. We can try. No. The word came out sharp, final. I won't let you sacrifice everything for me. I won't be responsible for destroying your relationship with your family, your kingdom. You deserve better than that, better than me. And there it was, the root of it all. Not practicality or politics, but Caelum's deep-seated belief that he wasn't worth fighting for, that he was too cold, too broken, too difficult to deserve someone's loyalty. You're doing it again, Pyralis said, his voice rough with tears he refused to shed. You're freezing yourself over, retreating, deciding for both of us what we can and can't handle. I'm being realistic. You're being a coward. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Caelum flinched as if Pyralis had struck him, and immediately Pyralis wanted to take it back, but the damage was done. If that's what you think, Caelum said quietly, frost spreading across the ground at his feet, then perhaps it's better that we end this now, before we hurt each other any more than we already have.
He turned and walked away, his wings rigid and glittering with defensive ice. Pyralis watched him go, anger and heartbreak warring in his chest. He wanted to call out, to chase after him, to fight for them the way he'd promised. But Caelum's words echoed in his head. I won't be responsible for destroying your relationship with your family. You deserve better than me. Maybe Caelum was right. Maybe love wasn't enough when it came with such impossible costs. Pyralis stood alone in the garden, surrounded by dying frost flowers and the ashes of his mother's letter, and wondered how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The worst part was that he understood Caelum's fear, understood the instinct to push away rather than risk being pushed away first. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. Around him, the garden began to wilt, sensitive plants curling away from the excess heat rolling off his body in waves. His magic, responding to his emotional state, was burning out of control, just like his mother had always warned him it would.
Chapter 7. The Longest Winter. The Twilight Keep, which had felt like home for the past months, became a prison. They couldn't avoid each other entirely. They still had duties, still had to monitor the border magic, but they moved around each other like polite strangers. Caelum retreated fully behind his mask of frost, while Pyralis burned too bright, his temper short and his magic unstable. The border responded accordingly. The careful balance they'd achieved began to fray. Plants withered, ice formations cracked,
The magical harmony dissolved into chaos once more. The councils noticed. Both kingdoms sent concerned messages asking what had changed, why the sudden deterioration after months of progress. Pyralis wanted to laugh hysterically at the irony. They'd stabilized the border through love, and now they were destroying it through heartbreak. He threw himself into his work, spending long hours trying to repair the damage alone. But fire magic without ice to balance it just created more problems. He scorched earth that needed to cool, melted structures that needed to stay frozen. Late one night, exhausted and frustrated, he encountered Caelum in the practice chamber. The Ice Prince was attempting the same thing, trying to fix their shared work alone. But ice without fire just froze everything solid, creating rigid structures that would shatter at the first sign of warmth. They stood on opposite sides of the room, looking at the evidence of their failures. "We can't do this separately," Caelum finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "The magic requires both elements." "I'm aware," Pyralis replied, equally cold, despite the flames dancing along his skin. "Perhaps we could work together for the magic. We don't have to speak beyond what's necessary for the spells." The suggestion hurt more than Pyralis wanted to admit, that they'd been reduced to this, strangers who shared space out of necessity, nothing more. But he nodded. "Fine, for the magic." They worked together in painful silence, combining their powers with the mechanical precision of two people who knew each other's magical signatures intimately, but refused to acknowledge anything deeper. The spells worked, barely. The magic responded, but sluggishly, as if it could sense the discord between them. When they finished, Caelum turned to leave without a word. "Do you miss me?" Pyralis asked before he could stop himself. Caelum froze, his hand on the door. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then, so quietly Pyralis almost didn't hear it. "Every moment of every day." He left before Pyralis could reply, leaving the Fire Fae alone with that devastating admission and no idea what to do with it. 3 weeks after the breakup, Pyralis received another letter from his mother. "Pyralis, we are pleased that you have apparently come to your senses regarding the Frost Prince. Your recent reports indicate the border situation has become complicated again, but we trust you will resolve it professionally. We expect you home at the end of your contracted time at the Twilight Keep. There will be a celebration of your return, and we have several suitable matches from prominent Sunfire families for you to consider. Your father and I are proud of your dedication to duty over personal desire. This is what it means to be Crown Prince. Queen Solaria." Pyralis stared at the letter, feeling nothing. No anger this time, no hurt, just a vast emptiness. His mother was proud of him for choosing duty, for giving up Caelum, for being a good, obedient prince who put his kingdom first. But Pyralis didn't feel like a good prince. He felt hollow, like he'd carved out something essential and left it bleeding in the Twilight Keep's gardens. He thought about the future his mother described, returning home, marrying someone suitable, ruling the Sunfire Court as expected. It was a good life, a comfortable life, everything he'd been raised to want. So why did it feel like dying? He found himself in the library that evening, drawn there by habit. It had been their space, his and Caelum's, where they'd talked and laughed and slowly fallen in love amid the books and the firelight. Caelum was already there, sitting in his usual chair, reading. He looked up when Pyralis entered, surprise flickering across his face before the mask descended again. "Sorry," Pyralis said. "I'll go." "You don't have to. The library is neutral territory." Pyralis hesitated, then moved to his own chair, the own one he'd always occupied, across from Caelum. They sat in silence, both pretending to read, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. Finally, Pyralis closed his book. "I got another letter from my mother. She's pleased I gave you up, says she's proud of me for choosing duty." "It's that good?" Caelum asked, carefully. "Is it? Because I don't feel good. I feel miserable. I wake up every day and my first thought is of you, and then I remember that we're not together anymore, and it's like losing you all over again. Pyralis, I'm not trying to change your mind. I just need you to know that this isn't better. Whatever you thought you were protecting me from, the pain of defying my mother, the difficulty of navigating politics, it's not worse than this. Being apart from you is the worst thing I've ever experienced. Caelum's book trembled in his hands. It doesn't matter how we feel. The situation hasn't changed. Your mother won't accept us. My father won't either. We'd be choosing love over 2 kingdoms, and it's too much weight, too much responsibility. What if we're worth it? And what if we're not? Caelum finally looked at him, and Pyralis could see the pain there, the longing poorly hidden behind ice. What if we defy our kingdoms, burn every bridge, and then discover that we can't survive the pressure, that we'd break under the weight of what we've done? Then we'll have destroyed everything for nothing.
You don't know that we would break. And you don't know that we wouldn't. Caelum stood abruptly, his wings flaring. I can't take that risk, Pyralis. I can't be responsible for you losing everything. I'd rather lose you now, when we can both still go back to our lives, than lose you later after we've burned the world down for each other. That's not your choice to make alone. Then what do you suggest? Caleb's composure finally shattered, and ice spread across the floor, up the walls. Tell me, O Crown Prince of Sunfire, what's your brilliant solution? How do we make this work when our kingdoms are opposed, our elements are opposed, and we'd be starting our lives together by defying everyone who's ever trusted us? Pyralis stood too, heat rising to combat the cold. The library became a war zone of competing magics, books trembling on their shelves. I don't have all the answers. I just know that I love you, and I thought that meant something. It means everything, Caelum said, and his voice broke. That's the problem. It means so much that I can't think rationally about it. I want to say yes, let's damn the consequences and be together. But I'm terrified that if we do, I'll watch you slowly come to resent me for what you gave up, and I couldn't bear that. I'd rather have you hate me now for being too afraid than watch you grow to hate me later for stealing your future. They stood facing each other across the room, fire and ice, love and fear. I could never hate you, Pyralis said quietly. Everyone I've ever cared about has hurt me. Everyone I've ever trusted has used me or left me. You're the first person in years who made me feel like maybe I was worth something more than my title and my magic. And I'm terrified that if I let myself believe that, if I let myself trust in us, I'll be destroyed when it inevitably falls apart. It doesn't have to fall apart. You can't promise that. Caelum's ice spread further, frost creeping across every surface. You can't promise that your mother won't force you to choose, that your people won't reject us, that we won't hurt each other so badly trying to make this work that there's nothing left to salvage. I've been hurt before, Pyralis. I barely survived it the first time. I won't survive it again, not if it's you. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. And suddenly Pyralis understood. This wasn't about duty or kingdoms or politics. This was about Caelum's bone-deep terror of being vulnerable, of being hurt again by someone he loved. You're right, Pyralis said softly. I can't promise any of that. I can't guarantee our kingdoms will accept us or that this will be easy. But I can promise that I won't hurt you deliberately, that I'll fight for us, even when it's hard, that I'll choose you every day, no matter what that costs me. How can you promise that when you don't know what it will cost? Because I already know what losing you costs, and it's more than I'm willing to pay. Pyralis crossed the room slowly, giving Caelum time to retreat if he wanted, but the Ice Prince stayed frozen in place, watching him approach with wide eyes. These past 3 weeks have been the longest winter of my life, and I don't want to live like this, cold and miserable and pretending that I'm fine when I'm falling apart. He stopped just in front of Caelum, close enough to see the frost on his eyelashes, the tremor in his hands. I love you, Pyralis said, and I'm terrified too, terrified of failing you, of not being enough, of proving that your fears are justified. But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Caelum's face crumpled, his carefully maintained mask shattering. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be brave enough." "Then let me be brave for both of us." Pyralis reached out and took Caelum's cold hand in his warm one. "Let me fight for us. Let me stand up to my mother, to your father, to anyone who says we can't be together. And when you're ready, when you've had time to heal and trust again, you can fight alongside me. But please don't make me do this alone. Please don't make me lose you." For a long moment, Caelum just stared at their joined hands, fire and ice, holding on despite everything. Then, with a sound that was half laugh, half sob, he pulled Pyralis into a fierce embrace. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was afraid, and I pushed you away, and I've been miserable every single sense." "I know." Pyralis held him tighter. "I know. Me too." They stood like that for a long time, clinging to each other in the frozen library, their magic slowly calming, finding its balance again, warmth and cold, perfectly equilibrated. "I still don't know how we make this work," Caelum said finally, pulling back just enough to look at Pyralis, his eyes red-rimmed, tears frozen on his cheeks. "About our kingdoms or our families. We'll figure it out, together this time, not separately." Pyralis wiped the frozen tears away with gentle fingers. "No more making decisions alone. No more pushing each other away. We're partners, remember? Fire and ice. We're stronger together." "Partners," Caelum echoed. Then, with a small smile that made Pyralis' heart soar, "I've missed you." "I've missed you too, so much." Pyralis kissed him softly, tasting salt and ice and coming home. "Never again, okay? We don't break up again. Whatever problems come, we face them together." "Together," Caelum agreed. "I can do together." Around them, the library began to thaw. The ice receded, the oppressive cold lifting. And through the windows, the first stars were appearing, bright against the twilight sky. They had a long road ahead of them, difficult conversations with their families, political complications to navigate, kingdoms to convince, but they would do it together, fire and ice united. And that, Pyralis thought as he held Caelum close, made all the difference.
Chapter 8. Forging Steel. The next morning, Pyralis woke with Caelum in his arms and a plan forming in his mind. They couldn't hide forever. Eventually, they'd have to face their kingdoms, their families, the political reality of their relationship. But they didn't have to face it unprepared. "We need leverage," he said over breakfast. They were eating together again, at the same table, sharing space like they used to. It felt like breathing after being underwater. "Something that makes our kingdoms need us together more than they need us to conform." Caelum looked up from his frostberry tea. "What did you have in mind?" "The border magic. We've proven we can stabilize it together, that our combined powers create something neither kingdom can achieve alone. What if we demonstrate that publicly, show both courts that fire and ice aren't just compatible, they're revolutionary?" "A demonstration," Caelum said slowly, considering. "Something undeniable, something that changes the conversation from whether we should be together to how soon we can formalize the alliance." "Exactly." Pyralis leaned forward, excitement building. "We have 2 months left here. What if we spend that time creating something impossible, something so magnificent that both kingdoms have to acknowledge that we're stronger together?" Caelum's eyes lit with the first genuine enthusiasm Pyralis had seen in weeks. "A joint working, major magic that requires perfect synchronization between our elements. There are legends of such things, ancient spells that united opposing forces to create lasting change." "Legends like what?" "The Eternal Gardens," Caelum said, warming to the subject. "Supposedly, millennia ago, a fire mage and an ice mage fell in love and created gardens that bloomed year-round, winter and summer simultaneously. Plants that thrived in any temperature, that brought prosperity to both their lands. But the knowledge was lost when their kingdoms went to war. Could we recreate it? Something like that, but on a larger scale?" Caelum was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Possibly, if we could find the ancient texts, understand the theory behind the original spells." He stood abruptly. "The Keep's library, it's old enough that it might have records from before the Great Schism, information that neither of our kingdoms preserved." They spent the next week buried in research. The library's oldest section was in the basement, protected by preservation spells and dust in equal measure. They sorted through crumbling texts and fragile scrolls, searching for any mention of fire and ice workings. It was Caelum who finally found it, a leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of mundane household accounts. "Pyralis," he breathed, reverent. "Look at this." The journal belonged to someone named Athen, a fire mage who'd lived over 1,000 years ago. The entries detailed his relationship with a frost mage named Chrysa, their desperate love, and their desperate attempt to prove that their elements could coexist peacefully. They'd created the eternal gardens, not just as beauty, but as proof that fire and ice, properly balanced, could support life that neither element could nurture alone. The journal included sketches, theories, the actual incantations they'd used. It was a treasure trove of lost knowledge. "This is it," Pyralis said, scanning the pages with growing excitement. "This is exactly what we need. If we can recreate this, prove that it's replicable. Our kingdoms would have to take notice," Caelum finished. "It wouldn't just be about us anymore. It would be about the potential for our realms to work together, to create something neither could achieve separately." They looked at each other, hope and determination mirrored in their expressions. "Let's do it," Pyralis said. "Let's create gardens that will make our kingdoms see what we see, that fire and ice together aren't weakness, they're power." The next 6 weeks were the most intense of Pyralis' life. Creating the eternal gardens wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. Every element had to be perfectly balanced. Too much heat, and the ice structures melted into useless water. Too much cold, and the fire-dependent plants froze before they could establish roots. They failed, repeatedly. The first attempt resulted in an explosion that took out half the training chamber and singed both their eyebrows. The second created plants that grew at an accelerated rate for 3 days before withering into ash. The third produced beautiful crystalline flowers that shattered at the slightest touch. "We're missing something," Caelum said after their 7th failure. He was exhausted, ice-pale skin even paler than usual, dark circles under his eyes. "The journal describes the technique, but there's something about the intent that we're not capturing."
Pyralis rubbed his temples, fighting off a headache from magical exhaustion. Athon writes about unity of purpose and harmonized essence. Maybe it's not just about combining our magic mechanically. Maybe it requires something deeper. Deeper how? I don't know. Emotional resonance? The original mages were in love. Maybe that emotional connection is actually part of the spell structure. Caelum looked skeptical. "You're suggesting that love is a magical component? Why not? Magic responds to emotion. You freeze things when you're upset. I burn hotter when I'm angry. What if sustained positive emotion, love specifically, creates a stable foundation for opposing elements to build on? That's actually theoretically sound." Caelum pulled out a piece of parchment and began sketching. "If we treat emotional resonance as a binding agent, a medium through which fire and ice can interact without canceling each other out." They worked through the night, refining their approach. Instead of trying to force their magics to cooperate through sheer will, they would let their connection, their love, be the channel through which the magic flowed. The next morning they tried again. This time they stood facing each other in the practice chamber, hands clasped, eyes locked. Pyralis could feel Caelum's pulse through their joined hands, steady and strong. Could see his own reflection in those ice-blue eyes. "Ready?" Pyralis asked softly. "Together," Caelum replied. They called their magic simultaneously, but instead of directing it outward immediately, they let it flow between them first, fire and ice, moving through the connection they'd forged over months of arguments and laughter and love. The magic circled between them, neither element dominating, both finding equilibrium. It felt like dancing, like the nights in the ballroom when Caelum had finally learned to let go and move with Pyralis, trusting him to lead without controlling.
When the magic reached perfect balance, warm and cool, bright and crystalline, they directed it together into the patch of earth they'd prepared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the soil began to glow with an inner light, neither hot nor cold, but perfectly temperate. A seed they'd placed there began to grow, unfurling leaves that shimmered with frost on one side and flame on the other. The stem was strong, neither brittle with ice nor charred with heat. A bud formed, opened, revealed a flower unlike anything in either of their kingdoms, petals that swirled with color, warm orange fading into cool blue, dancing with both fire and frost. It was beautiful. It was impossible. It was alive. "We did it!" Caelum whispered, awe in his voice. Pyralis laughed, giddy with success and exhaustion. "We did it!" They spent the rest of the day creating more, flowers and shrubs, small trees with leaves of flame and roots of ice. Each plant was a masterpiece, a living testament to what fire and ice could create together. By evening, they'd transformed a significant section of the practice chamber into a garden that belonged to both their realms and neither, a space that could only exist through their unity. They stood at the edge of their creation, hands still clasped, watching the strange plants sway in a breeze that brought both warmth and coolness. "It's beautiful," Pyralis said, "more than I imagined." "It's proof," Caelum added, "undeniable proof that we're not wrong to be together, that this," he gestured between them, "creates something valuable." "So what now? Do we invite our kingdoms to see it?" Caelum nodded slowly. "I'll send word to my father. You contact your mother. We'll frame it as a significant magical breakthrough requiring their immediate attention, and when they arrive, we show them what love can do." Pyralis finished. They sealed the plan with a kiss there in the garden they'd built together, surrounded by impossible flowers and the promise of a different future.
Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. Queen Solaria of the Sunfire Court arrived first, 3 days after receiving Pyralis's carefully worded message. She came with an entourage, advisors, guards, courtiers, all dressed in the brilliant colors of summer. Her chariot was pulled by phoenix birds, and she descended from it in a cascade of silk and flame, her wings spread wide to catch the afternoon sun. She was magnificent and intimidating in equal measure, and Pyralis felt himself reverting to childhood instincts, the urge to straighten his posture, to dim his own fire so as not to outshine hers. But then Caelum's hand found his, cool and steadying, and Pyralis remembered why they were doing this. He drew strength from that touch and stepped forward to greet his mother. "Your Majesty," he said formally, bowing, "thank you for coming." Solaria's gaze swept over him, taking in everything, his appearance, his stance, and most critically, the ice prince standing at his side. Her expression gave nothing away. "Pyralis, your message suggested a matter of utmost importance. I hope I haven't traveled all this way for nothing." Her eyes flicked to Caelum. "Prince Caelum, I understand you're also involved in this discovery." "Your Majesty," Caelum bowed, perfectly formal. "The discovery required both our magics. We could not have achieved it separately." "How convenient," Solaria said dryly. "Shall we proceed to this demonstration, then? I have other matters requiring my attention." King Glacier of the Frost Kingdom arrived as they were leading Solaria's party through the keep. His approach was quieter. No phoenix birds, no grand entrance. He simply appeared in the courtyard with a small contingent of frost guards, his presence marked by the temperature drop and the way frost crept across the stones. He was tall and severe, his features sharper than Caelum's, his eyes a paler shade of blue that held no warmth whatsoever. Where Solaria was fire and passion, Glacier was ice and calculation. "Father," Caelum greeted him with a bow even deeper than the one he'd given Solaria. "Caelum,"
Glacier's gaze swept over his son, lingered on where Caelum and Pyralis stood close together, and something flickered in those cold eyes. Disapproval? Disappointment? It was gone too quickly to tell. "The Sunfire Queen is already here, I see. Then we can begin." The two monarchs regarded each other with centuries of distrust. Fire and ice, enemies for so long that peace seemed impossible. "King Glacier," Solaria said coolly. "Queen Solaria," he replied with equal chill. The temperature in the courtyard fluctuated wildly, hot, then cold, then hot again, as their powers responded to each other instinctively. "Perhaps," Pyralis interjected before the situation could escalate, "we could move to the practice chamber. What we have to show you requires a neutral environment." Both monarchs looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since arriving. Pyralis met their gazes steadily, feeling Caelum's support beside him. "Lead the way," Solaria said finally. The Eternal Gardens had grown even more magnificent over the past few days. Pyralis and Caelum had continued to expand them, adding new species, refining the balance. Now the entire practice chamber had been transformed into a wonder that took the breath away. Plants that shouldn't exist swayed gently in the magical currents. Flowers bloomed with petals of flame and frost. Trees bore fruit that radiated both heat and cold, somehow remaining perfectly ripe indefinitely. Vines climbed walls, leaving trails of ice and embers that never consumed or melted. The air itself was perfect, neither hot nor cold, but comfortably balanced. It was a place where any fae from any court could exist in comfort. The gathered courts gasped as they entered. Even Solaria and Glacier, masters of maintaining composure, showed visible shock. "This is impossible," Solaria said, reaching out to touch a flame flower. It didn't burn her, just warmed her fingers pleasantly. "It should be impossible," Glacier agreed, examining an ice vine that didn't freeze his hand. Fire and ice in such close proximity, sustaining life rather than destroying it. How? "Through unity," Caelum said clearly, "through perfect balance and cooperation between our elements. The ancient texts speak of such magic. 1,000 years ago, before the Great Schism, fire and ice mages worked together to create gardens like this. We've recreated their techniques, proven that the old magic still works." Solaria moved through the garden slowly, her advisors and courtiers following, all touching the plants, marveling at the impossibility made real. "This is remarkable," she admitted, "truly remarkable. But what does this have to do with the border stabilization you were sent here to achieve?" "Everything," Pyralis said. "The border between our kingdoms has been unstable because our magics are in conflict, fire and ice constantly fighting for dominance. But when we work together, when we find balance instead of dominance, we create stability. These gardens are proof of concept. The same principles could be applied to the entire border region." "Impossible," Glacier said flatly. "The border is hundreds of miles long. You couldn't possibly maintain this level of balance across such a distance." "Not alone," Caelum acknowledged, "but if our kingdoms worked together, if we trained fire and ice mages to cooperate rather than compete, it would be possible, more than possible. We could transform the border from a place of chaos into a place of prosperity." "You're suggesting a permanent alliance between our courts, fire and ice working together indefinitely. That's a significant political shift." "The alternative is watching the border tear itself apart," Pyralis pointed out. "The instability is getting worse. You've both seen the reports. Eventually, it will spread beyond the borderlands, affecting both kingdoms. These gardens prove we can fix it, but only together." The two monarchs exchanged a long look. Centuries of distrust, of war and uneasy truces communicated in that single glance. "This would require significant cooperation," Glacier said slowly. "Exchanges of knowledge, of personnel. Fire mages in the Frost Kingdom, ice mages in Sunfire lands. Cultural integration," Solaria added, "breaking down barriers that have existed for millennia." "Yes," Caelum said simply, "it would require all of that. But the benefits would be enormous, not just the border stabilization, but new magic, new possibilities. Think of what else we could create if our courts worked together. Solaria turned to study the two princes, her son and the Ice Prince, standing side by side, united. "And this isn't just about magic, is it?" she asked quietly. Pyralis felt Caelum tense beside him, but forced himself to meet her mother's gaze steadily. "Yes, it's personal. Caelum and we've developed feelings for each other. We're together. And I know that's not what you wanted, Mother, but—"
"But it's part of why this works," Caelum interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "The magic requires more than just technical skill. It requires emotional resonance, trust, genuine connection. That's the missing piece that's been lost for 1,000 years.
"You're telling me," Glacier said, frost spreading across the floor at his feet, "that my son's success is dependent on a romantic entanglement with the Sunfire heir?" "I'm telling you," Caelum replied, meeting his father's cold gaze without flinching, "that I'm in love with Pyralis, and that love is part of what makes this magic possible. But more than that, I'm telling you that fire and ice aren't enemies, they're complementary. And if our kingdoms can't see that, can't embrace it, then we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past." The silence that followed was deafening. The courtiers and advisors looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to be shocked or supportive. The guards remained impassive, and the two monarchs stood frozen, Solaria with surprise evident on her face, Glacier with his features locked in icy disapproval. Then Solaria began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into genuine laughter that rang through the garden. Everyone stared at her, including Pyralis. "Oh, my son," she said, wiping her eyes, "do you think I didn't know? Do you think your feelings were subtle?" Pyralis blinked. "You knew?" "Of course I knew. Why do you think I sent that letter? I was testing you, testing whether you'd choose duty over love, whether you'd crumble under pressure." She moved closer, her expression now softer. "And you chose love, not recklessly. You didn't just defy me and run away together. You chose to find a solution that honored both your heart and your responsibilities. You created something that proves your love has value to the kingdom, not just to yourself." "That was a test?" Pyralis said, heat rising along his skin, anger mixing with relief. "You made us miserable as a test?" "I made you prove that this was real, that it was worth fighting for." Solaria looked between him and Caelum. "Love is common, my son. Love that creates something greater than itself is rare. This," she gestured at the gardens, "this is worthy of a crown prince." She turned to Glacier. "The question is whether the Frost Kingdom is prepared to be equally progressive." All eyes turned to the Ice King. He stood silent, studying his son with an unreadable expression. "Caelum," he finally said, "come here." Caelum squeezed Pyralis's hand once, then crossed to his father. They stood facing each other, ice and ice, so similar in appearance, yet so different in bearing. "You've always been the dutiful one," Glacier said quietly. "Never questioned, never rebelled. I thought that meant you had no fire in you, that you were purely ice through and through. I see now I was wrong." "Father!" "Let me finish." Glacier's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You found fire, not in your element, but in your heart. And instead of letting it consume you or trying to freeze it out, you found balance. That takes strength I didn't know you had." He glanced at Pyralis, then back to Caelum. "The Sunfire Prince makes you warmer, makes you braver. I've read your reports. You've accomplished more in these 6 months than in years of previous attempts to stabilize the border. And now this," he gestured at the gardens, "this is extraordinary, Caelum. You're extraordinary." Caelum's eyes were suspiciously bright, ice crystals forming at the corners. "Does that mean—" "It means I approve," Glacier said,
More than that, I support this alliance, personal and political. If the Sunfire Queen is amenable, I propose we formalize a partnership between our kingdoms, starting with the border project, but extending to broader cooperation." Salaria smiled. "I believe that can be arranged, Your Majesty." The two monarchs began discussing terms, their advisors clustering around them. And in the middle of the garden, Pyralis and Caelum stood together, hands clasped, scarcely believing what had just happened. "Did we just," Pyralis started, "get our parents' blessing?" Caelum finished. "I think we did. I thought I'd have to fight harder for this. Burn down half a kingdom or something? Dramatic?" Caelum laughed, the sound bright and free. "You did fight. We both did. We just fought smart instead of fighting destructive." Pyralis pulled him close, not caring that both their parents and half of 2 royal courts were watching. "I love you," he said clearly for everyone to hear. "Fire and ice, impossible and perfect." "I love you too," Caelum replied, tilting his head up for a kiss that sealed their victory. Around them, the eternal gardens bloomed brighter, as if the plants themselves were celebrating.
Chapter 10. Building Bridges. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of activity. The official announcement of the alliance between the Sunfire and Frost courts sent shockwaves through both kingdoms. Some celebrated, those who were tired of the old conflicts, who saw the potential for prosperity and cooperation. Others protested, traditionalists who believed fire and ice should never mix, who saw the union of the crown princes as a betrayal of ancient values. But the eternal gardens were hard to argue with. When delegations from both courts visited the Twilight Keep and saw what fire and ice could create together, opposition began to crumble. Hard to maintain that cooperation was impossible when the impossible was blooming right in front of them. Pyralis and Caelum became ambassadors for the new alliance, traveling between the kingdoms, giving demonstrations and teaching others the techniques they'd developed. It was exhausting work, but rewarding. Watching fire and ice mages work together for the first time, seeing the wonder on their faces when they achieved what they'd thought impossible, it made everything worth it. The border stabilization project expanded. Teams of mixed mages began working on sections of the border, creating gardens and sustainable ecosystems. The chaotic zone shrank daily, replaced by thriving growth. Villages that had been abandoned due to the magical instability began to repopulate. Trade routes opened. The two kingdoms, separated for so long, began to reconnect. Through it all, Pyralis and Caelum remained at the center, guiding the project, solving problems, proving again and again that their partnership, personal and magical, was the foundation everything else was built on. But it wasn't all politics and public demonstrations. They also had to figure out how to actually be together. Pyralis had never been in a serious relationship before. His romantic history consisted of brief flirtations, passionate affairs that burned hot and fast before fizzling out. The idea of building something lasting, something that required patience and compromise and genuine emotional work, was new territory. Caelum had his own challenges. His walls had come down with Pyralis, but they were still there, ready to snap back up whenever he felt threatened or vulnerable. Learning to communicate instead of freezing people out was an ongoing process. They fought sometimes, not the bitter, destructive arguments of their early days at the keep, but the normal conflicts of two strong-willed people learning to share their lives. Pyralis would get frustrated with Caelum's need to plan everything, to analyze every emotion before expressing it. Caelum would get overwhelmed by Pyralis's intensity, his tendency to make decisions impulsively and expect Caelum to just go along with them. But they were learning to recognize when they were falling into old patterns, learning to talk about problems before they festered, learning that sometimes love meant giving each other space, and sometimes it meant pushing through discomfort to stay connected.
One evening, about 5 months after the alliance was announced, they sat together in what had become their favorite spot, the original garden they'd created in the practice chamber, which they'd kept even as they'd moved the main project to the border. "I've been thinking," Caelum said, his head resting on Pyralis' shoulder. "Dangerous activity," Pyralis teased, playing with the strands of Caelum's silver-white hair. "Serious thought, not just worry spiral thinking." Caelum tilted his head to look up at him. "About our future. We've been so focused on the border project, on proving ourselves to our kingdoms, that we haven't really talked about what comes next, for us, personally." Pyralis felt his heartbeat quicken. "What about our future? We can't live at the Twilight Keep forever. Eventually, we'll need to return to our courts, take up our responsibilities as heirs." Caelum sat up fully, turning to face him. "I don't want to be apart from you. I don't want to split our time between kingdoms, always saying goodbye, always leaving." "So, what are you suggesting?" "A formal union, not just an alliance between our kingdoms, but between us. A bonding ceremony that joins us officially, makes us partners in the eyes of both courts." Caelum's usual composure was cracking, uncertainty showing through. "I'm suggesting marriage, I suppose. Is that something you'd want?" Pyralis stared at him, joy and surprise warring in his chest. Caelum, are you proposing to me?" "I'm suggesting it as a logical solution to our geographical problem," Caelum said, but his cheeks were flushed with color, and his wings were shimmering with barely contained emotion. "We could live jointly, split our time between both courts as a pair, rather than individually. It would cement the alliance, show both kingdoms that cooperation is our future. It's practical and politically sound, and—" Pyralis kissed him, cutting off the nervous explanation. When he pulled back, he was grinning. "You're very bad at proposals, you know that?" "I've never proposed before. I don't know the proper form." "The proper form," Pyralis said, cupping Caelum's face in his warm hands, "usually involves saying something about love, about wanting to spend your life with someone, not just listing political advantages." Caelum's expression softened. "I love you, more than I thought I could love anyone. You make me laugh, and you challenge me, and you see through all my defenses to the person underneath. And I want to spend my life with you, not because it's politically advantageous, but because the thought of a future without you in it feels empty and cold. Even when you're annoying, even when we fight, even when you eat all the fire berries before I can have any." That was one time. "You're the warmth I didn't know I was missing," Caelum said, his voice dropping to something quiet and vulnerable. "And I want to wake up next to you every day. I want to build a life together, whatever that looks like. So yes, I'm proposing, badly, apparently, but genuinely. Pyralis of Sunfire, will you bond with me?" Pyralis felt heat prickling behind his eyes, actual tears, which he hadn't cried since he was a child. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes. I'll bond with you and drive you crazy and love you until the end of time. Yes." They kissed again, deeper this time, celebratory and sure. Their magic swirled around them, fire and ice dancing in perfect harmony, creating patterns of light that painted the garden in shifting colors. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and glowing, Caelum produced something from his robes, a ring made of interwoven ice and flame, somehow solid and stable, beautiful in its impossibility. "I had this made," Caelum said, slipping it on Pyralis' finger. "From our magic combined. It won't melt and it won't burn. It's permanent, like us." Pyralis looked at the ring, then at Caelum, then laughed with pure joy. "We're really doing this. We're getting married." "Bonded," Caelum corrected with a small smile. "But yes, we're really doing this. My mother is going to be insufferable. She'll want to plan everything."
My father will insist on traditional frost ceremonies. We'll compromise. Fire traditions and ice traditions.
The first truly unified royal bonding in 1,000 years. It's going to be a diplomatic nightmare, Caelum said. It's going to be perfect, Pyralis countered. And sitting there in their garden, surrounded by impossible flowers and the promise of an impossible future, they both believed it.
Chapter 11. The Bonding. The bonding ceremony took place on the spring equinox, exactly 1 year after they'd first kissed in the Twilight Keep. The location was the border itself, specifically the largest section of the eternal gardens they'd created there. It had grown into a true wonder, a massive park that stretched for miles, filled with plants and trees that belonged to both kingdoms and neither. It was neutral ground, balanced ground, the perfect symbol of what they represented. The guest list was enormous, both royal courts, of course, plus representatives from every noble house in the Sunfire and Frost kingdoms. Neutral fae from the borderlands, foreign dignitaries from allied realms who wanted to witness this historic union. By the time everyone had arrived, thousands of fae filled the gardens. Pyralis stood in a preparation chamber, a beautiful pavilion made of living flame that didn't consume, didn't spread, just burned eternally as walls and ceiling. His attendants were fussing over his ceremonial attire, loose pants in deep red silk, a vest of woven fire silk that shimmered like living flames, cuffs of beaten gold at his wrists and ankles. His wings were oiled until they gleamed, the flames dancing along their veins bright and strong. His mother entered, resplendent in her own ceremonial robes, and dismissed the attendants with a wave. "You look nervous," she observed. "I'm not nervous, I'm excited." Pyralis adjusted his vest for the 100th time. "Okay, maybe a little nervous. This is big." "The biggest political event in centuries," Solaria agreed. "The union of fire and ice, the beginning of a new era." She moved closer, her expression softening. "But also just my son bonding with the person he loves. Don't lose sight of that in all the politics and ceremony." "Did you know?" Pyralis asked suddenly. "When you sent me to the Twilight Keep, did you know this would happen?" Solaria smiled enigmatically. "I knew you and Caelum were perfectly matched, opposite enough to challenge each other, similar enough in your dedication and strength to understand each other. Whether that would become love or lifelong rivalry I couldn't predict, but I suspected it would be one or the other, nothing lukewarm with you two." "And you're really okay with this, with me bonding to an ice prince?" "I'm proud of you," Solaria said firmly. "You didn't just follow your heart, you made it work, politically, magically, practically. You found a way to be true to yourself while serving your kingdom. That's what a good ruler does, and you'll make an excellent king someday. Both of you will." She kissed his forehead, then stepped back. "It's time. Are you ready?" Pyralis took a deep breath, feeling his fire steady and strong within him. "I'm ready." Caelum stood in his own preparation chamber, a pavilion of living ice that didn't melt, crystal walls that let light through in rainbow refractions. His attendants had dressed him in traditional frost formal wear, robes of white and silver, layered and flowing, with geometric ice patterns embroidered in threads that caught the light. His hair was braided with silver chains, and a circlet of ice rested on his brow. His father appeared as the attendants were making final adjustments, and they quickly bowed themselves out. "You look like a proper frost prince," agreed Glacier. "Your mother would have been proud." Caelum felt a pang at the mention of his mother, who died when he was young. She'd been the warm one, the one who balanced his father's cold pragmatism with love and laughter. He wished she could be here for this. "I think she would have liked Pyralis," Caelum said softly. "She would have adored him. She always said I needed someone to warm me up." Glacier's expression softened, a rare sight.
She would have been happy to see you happy, Caelum. And you are happy, aren't you?
I am. Happier than I thought I could be. Good. Glacier placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of affection that was almost unprecedented. You've accomplished something I never could. You found balance between duty and desire, between strength and vulnerability, between ice and fire. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Caelum felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, Father. Now come, your fire prince is waiting, and we can't have him burning down the gardens in impatience. The ceremony itself was a blend of both traditions, carefully negotiated over months of planning. It began with the Sunfire ritual of first light. As the sun reached its apex, Pyralis walked through the gardens alone, a trail of flame following in his wake, symbolizing bringing light and warmth to the darkness. The gathered crowds parted for him, and he moved through them with his head high, wings spread, every inch the crown prince of Sunfire. At the same moment, from the opposite direction, Caelum performed the frost ritual of still peace. He walked in complete silence, frost spreading from his feet in delicate patterns, symbolizing the calm and clarity ice brings to chaos. He too moved through the crowds, regal and composed, the perfect image of frost royalty. They met in the center of the gardens, at a circular platform surrounded by their impossible flowers. Fire and ice, approaching from opposite directions, meeting in the middle. When they were close enough to touch, they stopped and faced each other. The ceremony required them to speak vows, not just to each other, but to both kingdoms, declaring their intentions and commitments. Pyralis spoke first, his voice carrying through the gardens with magical amplification. I, Pyralis of the Sunfire Court, crown prince of flame and light, vow to bond with Caelum of the Frost Kingdom. I pledge my fire to warm but not burn, to illuminate but not blind. I pledge to honor the ice as I honor the flame, to seek balance in all things, to rule with both passion and wisdom. Before both our kingdoms, I claim Caelum as my partner, my equal, my love. Then Caelum, his voice cool and clear. I, Caelum of the Frost Kingdom, heir to the throne of ice and snow, vow to bond with Pyralis of the Sunfire Court. I pledge my ice to cool but not freeze, to preserve but not stagnate. I pledge to honor the flame as I honor the frost, to seek harmony in all things, to rule with both clarity and courage. Before both our kingdoms, I claim Pyralis as my partner, my equal, my love. The gathered crowds erupted in applause, some enthusiastic, some merely polite, but all acknowledging the historic moment. Queen Solaria and King Glacier stepped forward, each holding a ceremonial object. Solaria carried a flame in a crystal vessel, the eternal fire of the Sunfire Court, which had burned for millennia. Glacier carried a shard of ice, a piece of the first frost, the original ice from which the Frost Kingdom was born. They approached the two princes and spoke in unison. With fire and ice we bless this union. May it bring warmth and clarity, passion and peace to both our kingdoms and to your lives together. Pyralis and Caelum each took their respective element, Pyralis the flame, Caelum the ice, and then, in a move they'd practiced for weeks, they combined them. The flame and the ice met in their joined hands, and instead of canceling each other out, they merged, transformed, created something new, a light that was both warm and cool, that flickered with fire, but had the geometric beauty of ice crystals. It was stunning, impossible, perfect. They raised this combined light above their heads, and it exploded outward in a gentle wave that washed over everyone present. The crowd gasped as they felt it, warmth and coolness simultaneously, comfort and clarity, the perfect balance of opposing forces. When the light faded, Pyralis and Caelum were wearing matching circlets, neither pure fire nor pure ice, but something between, something that could only exist because of their union. They were bonded, officially, magically, completely. The celebrations that followed lasted 3 days. There was feasting and dancing, exhibitions of combined fire and ice magic, performances by artists from both kingdoms. Dignitaries gave speeches about the new era of cooperation. Treaties were signed, expanding the alliance beyond just the border project. But through it all, Pyralis and Caelum remained at the center, touching frequently, exchanging looks, clearly in love in a way that made the political alliance feel secondary to the personal one. On the second day of celebrations, they participated in the traditional bonding games, games designed to test the compatibility and teamwork of newly bonded couples. Some were serious tests of magical synchronization, others were lighter, more playful. In one challenge, they had to navigate a maze blindfolded, relying only on each other's voice and touch to find the way out. Pyralis kept wanting to burn through the walls, while Caelum insisted they map the maze methodically. They compromised, using Pyralis's heat sense to detect temperature variations that indicated pathways, combined with Caelum's logical approach to eliminate dead ends. They finished second, beaten only by a couple who'd been bonded for 30 years. Another challenge required them to create a synchronized display of magic for the assembled courts. Other couples performed beautiful but conventional demonstrations, fire spirals, ice sculptures, coordinated elemental dances. Pyralis and Caelum created something different. They wove their magic together into a story, a visual narrative of their journey from enemies to lovers, all told through living magic that moved and shifted and felt more like poetry than demonstration. When they finished, the silence stretched for a heartbeat before the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Several people were crying. Queen Solaria looked insufferably smug, as if she'd orchestrated the whole thing from the beginning. On the third night, as the celebrations were finally winding down, they slipped away from the crowds and found a quiet corner of the gardens, the very spot where they'd created their first successful frost flower all those months ago. Exhausted? Pyralis asked, pulling Caelum close. Completely, but happy. Caelum rested his head on Pyralis's shoulder. We did it. We're actually married. Bonded, Pyralis corrected with a grin. Same thing. Caelum was quiet for a moment, then, do you know what I was thinking during the ceremony, when we were walking towards each other through the crowd? What? I was thinking about the first time I saw you, at that treaty negotiation 5 years ago. You were arguing passionately about border rights, and your wings kept sparking with agitation. I thought you were the most infuriating person I'd ever met. So much fire, so much chaos. I couldn't imagine anything worse than having to work with you. Pyralis laughed. I remember that day. You stood there like a statue, barely speaking, and when you did, it was to point out all the flaws in my arguments with that cold, precise logic. I thought you were the most insufferable person alive, so rigid, so controlled. I felt sorry for whoever ended up bonded to you. And now look at us. Now look at us, Pyralis echoed, pressing a kiss to Caelum's temple. The most infuriating and insufferable couple in history. I prefer to think of us as perfectly balanced. That too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the impossible flowers glow softly in the darkness. Around them, they could hear the sounds of celebration continuing, music and laughter from both courts, mixed together, the sound of two kingdoms learning to be one. What do you think comes next, after all this? Caelum asked. Life, Pyralis said simply. We go back to our kingdoms, both of them now, since they're ours jointly. We continue the border work. We rule, eventually, when our parents decide they're ready to step down. We keep proving that fire and ice can work together. Sounds like a lot of work. It will be, but we'll do it together.
Pyralis turned Caelum to face him fully, his hands warm against the Ice Prince's cool cheeks. I know it won't always be easy. I know we'll still fight sometimes, still frustrate each other, still struggle with our differences. But Caelum, I swear to you, I will choose you every day, even on the hard days, even when we're driving each other crazy. I will always choose us. Caelum's eyes were bright with unshed tears, happy tears for once, not frozen. I will too, every day, every challenge, every moment. You and me, fire and ice, building something that will outlast us both. They kissed then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and around them the garden seemed to bloom brighter, as if the plants themselves approved of the vow. When they finally returned to the celebration hand in hand, their combined magic trailing behind them like a banner, the assembled courts burst in fresh applause, because everyone could see it.
This has been a Chapters in Honey original. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this book, we'd be incredibly grateful if you take a moment to subscribe to our channel. It helps us bring you more amazing stories. Leave a comment below and let us know what you thought, what your favorite moments were, or what you'd like to hear next. And don't forget to share this with your book buddy, because the best stories are the ones we experience together. We'll see you soon with another incredible read. Until then, happy reading!